when heaven desired the dust. In the elder years of the world, when the rivers still ran clear enough to mirror the stars and cities had not yet scarred the plains with their towers, mankind multiplied across the face of the earth. Villages became towns, towns became kingdoms, and kingdoms sent their roads like veins through forests and deserts and over the backs of hills. Fires burned in 1,000 hearths. Children laughed in courtyards. Shepherds sang at dusk. Smiths hammered bronze in the morning light. Brides were carried veiled into houses garlanded with cedar and myrtle. And among the sons and daughters of men there was beauty. It rose like dawn in the faces of women drawing water at the wells, in the songs of maidens gathering grain, in the dark eyes of girls who danced at harvest feasts beneath oil lamps and moonlight. Their names passed through villages as blessings: Tirzah, Elin, Mara, Sela. Men loved them, fathers guarded them, mothers taught them, and poets tried to bind their radiance in words and failed. But there were others who saw them. They were not men, though they wore the shape of men when it pleased them. They came from the high places, from the hidden thresholds between heaven and the lower world, from regions of brilliance no ploughman had seen and no shepherd had dared imagine. They were called by many names in secret: watchers, morning princes, sons of God. Once they had looked upon the earth as a gardener looks upon a field and praised the workmanship of the Most High. But praise curdled into desire and desire into hunger. So they descended. At first they came as strangers of impossible beauty, with voices like bronze bells and eyes that seemed to hold the stars themselves. They entered feast halls and sat among men like kings in exile. They walked through vineyards at dusk and stood in the shadows of doorways. Some women followed them willingly, enchanted by their splendor and the terrible sweetness of their words. Others were taken because the mighty do not ask when they have grown used to being obeyed. Thus heaven reached down and seized dust in its hand. In a valley called Aramoth, where wheat grew golden between two rivers, there lived a potter named Jadon, his wife Havilah, and their only daughter, Leora. Leora was 17 when the strangers first appeared in the valley. She was not a queen's daughter nor the child of a renowned chief. She rose before dawn to knead clay, to draw water, to help her mother card wool. Yet there was in her face a quiet loveliness that made old women smile and strangers pause. Her eyes were dark as wet earth, and her hair, when unbound, fell like a river over her shoulders. She was gentle with lambs and bold with questions. Sometimes, when she climbed the ridge above the village to watch the sunset, she felt there was something unfinished in her soul, as though her heart were waiting for a song it had never heard. The song came in the form of a man named Asael. He arrived during the Feast of First Fruits, when the village ovens glowed and the smell of bread drifted through the streets. He seemed younger than the elders and older than the mountains. No dust clung to his sandals. No weariness bent his shoulders. When he spoke, men turned to listen. When he smiled, women forgot their work. He saw Leora by the well. From that moment, the valley was changed. He began to appear wherever she went, in the olive grove at noon, on the ridge at twilight, beneath the fig tree beside her father's kiln. He spoke to her of stars beyond numbering, of seas above the heavens, of fire that sang, of creatures with wings of crystal. He spoke of wonders hidden from mortals, and the world she had known became small and dim beside the world he described. "You were not made for mud walls and bread ovens," he told her one evening as red light pooled over the hills. "There is greatness sleeping in your bones." Leora trembled at his voice. "I am only a potter's daughter." "No," Asael said, stepping close. "You are desired." That word entered her heart like wine. Jadon saw the change first. Leora moved through the house as if listening to distant music. Sometimes she smiled at nothing. Sometimes she stared at the sky until her chores went undone. Havilah, wiser in the ways of longing, took her daughter's hands and asked softly, "Who has found you?" Leora wept, but she would not say. The village soon learned what had happened. They were not the first. Other daughters had vanished into the hills for nights and returned with silk on their skin and strangeness in their eyes. Some families rejoiced, believing themselves honored by heaven. Others hid their daughters behind barred doors. Yet doors mean little to beings who have crossed the threshold of stars. when Asael came openly to Jadon's house to claim Leora. He did not ask her father's blessing. Jadon stood in the doorway, clay still streaking his arms, and found himself unable to breathe. Asael's beauty was terrible up close, like sunlight on a blade. "She is mine," Asael said. "No," Jadon answered, though his knees shook. "She is my daughter." The being regarded him almost kindly, as one regards a dog that bares its teeth at thunder. "You are dust speaking against flame." Leora came forward then, white-faced and shaking. She looked at her father, at her mother, at the stranger whose gaze burned through her like fever. "I will go," she whispered. Havilah cried out as though struck. Jadon gripped the lintel until it splintered in his hand. But Leora went, and Asael took her into the hills where old stones stood in rings, and the night never seemed entirely dark. She returned months later, carrying a child. By then, the valley of Aramoth was not as it had been. Men who had once kept flocks now forged weapons for sport. Chiefs competed in cruelty and called it strength. Songs at feast days had grown coarse and blood-stained. The sons born of the heavenly ones had begun to rise among the tribes, huge-limbed, broad-shouldered, fierce-eyed children who grew like storm clouds and broke games into battles and battles into massacres. They wrestled lions for amusement. They tore cedar doors from hinges. Their laughter had no mercy in it. Some called them blessed. Others, in whispers, called them cursed. Leora's child was born in the season of black figs, and the labor nearly killed her. Havilah wiped blood from her daughter's brow, while thunder rolled over the plain, and the house beams groaned as though under some invisible weight. At dawn the child emerged, silent at first, then crying with a voice too deep for an infant. He was enormous. His fingers closed around Havilah's wrist hard enough to bruise. His eyes opened on the first day and seemed already to know the room. A dark mark like a broken star lay across his chest. Leora named him Nereth. He grew as no mortal child grows. At 1 year he walked. At 3 he could carry jars too heavy for grown men. At 5 he killed a wild dog with a stone. At 7 he stood taller than boys twice his age. The villagers stared at him with fear disguised as admiration. Children followed him. Men praised his strength. Women crossed themselves when he passed. He loved his mother fiercely. With her alone, some gentleness remained in him. He would lay his great head in Leora's lap and listen while she sang the songs of the valley. He would sit by Jadon's wheel and watch clay rise trembling beneath old hands. He asked sometimes, "Where is my father?" Leora never answered fully. "Far away." "Will he return?" Her face would go pale. "I pray he does not." But Asael watched from afar. Sometimes Leora felt his presence at the edge of the fields, in the coldness behind the stars, in dreams where wings of fire passed over black water. As Nereth became a man, the earth itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of his generation. Not him alone, but all his kind. Across the lands the mighty ones rose, warriors whose names became legends while they still lived. They built fortresses from stone too heavy for ordinary men. They hunted for pleasure, not food. They took gold, cattle, women, and sons from weaker tribes. When resisted, they annihilated. When praised, they demanded worship. Men learned from them greed, domination, and strange arts. They taught the forging of sharper blades, the reading of omens in entrails, the compounding of poisons, the craft of seduction, the bending of wills. Violence spread as rot spreads through fruit. Brothers murdered brothers for inheritance. Priests sold blessings for silver. Judges ruled for bribes. Mothers sang their babies to sleep while hearing screams from distant roads.